Hey guys, it's Jake here with eTrailer. Today we have a 2023 Ford F-150 and we're going to be taking a look at and I'm going to show you how to install the Demco Air Force One supplemental braking system. The five main components that you're going to need to flat tow a vehicle are going to be your base plate, which is going to connect to the vehicle, allowing you to pull it down the road. Next will be your tow bar, which will connect your RV to your towed vehicle to safely get it down the road. Next is going to be your braking system. That's going to allow the towed vehicle to stop itself while the RV is stopping itself. Next is going to be our diode wiring. This is going to allow the RV to send the turn signals and braking signals to the taillights on your truck to allow others to know what your intentions are when you're headed down the road. Lastly is going to be your safety cables. These are important to have. In an unlikely disconnect from your vehicle to your motorhome, your safety cables will kick in and they will help to keep the vehicle behind you while you pull over and get to a safe stop. To begin your installation for your Air Force One, there's going to be a lot of different parts that we're going to have to find places for in order to mount them. The first being our operating unit, because it's going to be the biggest. We chose to mount it right next to our battery, and we ended up using a piece of angle bracket down in the bottom. We happen to have one here around the shop that had an angle bracket with this post on it. You might be able to find a battery post that is designed to secure the top of a battery that could do this same thing. I'm pretty sure that's what this bracket was for. And then we bent this S bracket, we tapped into the top of this rod, and this is pushing down with the little foam pad on top of our operating unit. And it's plenty secure in there, it's not going to go anywhere. But this can also be removed in case the owner of this vehicle needs to take this out and never replace it. Now what we're going to do is we have a power wire and a switch wire that we're going to have to run down to the bumper with the rest of our 4-pole. And then we have a couple wires that we're going to have to run up inside the vehicle underneath the steering column. What we're going to do is we'll go ahead and run those and then come back and show you how we did it. So from down by our bumper, we've got our airline tube that's running up to our operating unit. Then we have one of these is this longer one here is our charge line. We have another power wire going up to our operating unit, which is going to attach to the battery. And then we have the brown wire, which is the extension they give you to go up and inside the vehicle to attach to the switch that's on your cylinder. And then the black wire is going up to one of the two black wires on the operating unit. And up here by the battery, it may look a little confusing because there's kind of wires everywhere. But we connected that black wire that we ran up to one of the two black wires coming out of our operating unit. It doesn't matter which one. The other one just needs to be grounded. So that's what we did. We put another little jumper wire on it and we'll ground that eventually. We're not going to ground it right now. Then we have the red wire coming up from the bumper that will attach to the battery. We put the inline fuse holder without the fuse on it. We have these loosely sitting here too, and then finally we have our last red wire, which is our charge line, which is run down to the circuit breaker right here, which is also run down to the bumper. So just kind of give you an idea of where the wires are coming from and where they're going. So now that we've got our two black wires connected to where they're supposed to be connected to, our power wires are all connected up, ready to attached to the battery. To point out where our outlet for our air is, the out on the air is going to go to the cylinder that will be attached to our brake pedal. The in will be coming from the motorhome. That's going to be this inlet and this outlet. That's why we took this airline. I always like to make it more than long enough. Even in this truck, running it across the hood, you're going to have about 15 feet extra, so leave yourself a couple extra feet so that you can run nice gentle turns. But we took this, ran it over, zip tied it along the way on this top bracket here, zip tied it to this bracket that's holding some of our hoses. I did put a piece of wire loom so that the metal bracket is not touching this hose so it doesn't wear a hole in it. And then down there in the corner, you can see the grommet that we ran through. We ran the brown wire and our outlet air hose down through that grommet. We'll show you what it looks like on the inside. Now you can see the air line we ran in and the brown wire that's coming into the foot pedal area by the driver. Before we get anything else connected, you do want to make sure that if you have adjustable pedals, which this truck does, that you adjust them all the way out, so furthest, closest to the driver's seat. And then now we can get our brake cylinder attached and get our wiring attached. In our footwell, you can see all the connections we made. The cylinder you want to attach directly to the back wall. You want the line to be pulling as straight as possible. If your brake pedal kind of swoops up like ours does, when you push the brake, the pedal kind of goes up a little bit. You want to overcompensate for that and put your bracket a little bit higher on the firewall. And then we'll have about 1/4 of an inch of slack or 1/8 of an inch of slack in our cable. The brown wire that we ran through the firewall is going to be connected to the maroon wire that is on the wiring harness that's coming off of our cylinder. The blue wire on the cylinder will be connected to the red wire on the coach link controller, and then the white wire from the coach link controller will need to get grounded to the firewall. Now back up by our operating unit, there's a couple things we need to do before we finish off all of our connections. Because our vehicle does not have a traditional brake booster, we're not going to need to install the vacuum line, which would typically run over to our vacuum line on our brake booster. You would tee it off, tie into it so that you can have that for the operating unit. Because ours does not have that and it has the electric assist booster, we're just going to need to plug the 2 openings for our vacuum line. So originally you would run your vacuum line right here, run it over your brake booster. Well, because we're not using it, we just need to plug this. So take the plug that comes in your kit, slide it on, try to get it on all the way. We'll take this, push this on. Then we'll slide over a hose clamp. Then we're going to slide it onto the end of here and we'll put on another hose clamp. Just like that. Take one hose clamp, put it up here on the fitting on the operating unit, and then take another one and put it right there. Now we can start buttoning everything up under the hood, and then we can get our front grille and fascia back on in order to make our final connections down by the bumper. So we'll measure our airline to fit in here. You want to give yourself, see, I give myself a little bit extra space up here. And when you're cutting airline, be sure to cut straight. That was a pretty good cut the first time. So if you don't have an airline cutter like we have, you can just take a razor blade and push straight down on a board or a flat surface, anything that you can find. But we'll loop this down and then insert it in the air out. And you want to make sure it clicks like that. Give it a little tug out and make sure it's secure. In addition to plugging up our vacuum line here, we need to take this little button head nut that comes in your kit and we'll seal up this little fitting here on the end. And this port is the exhaust for the system, but because our system is going to be a closed system, we don't need that exhaust anymore. Now again, with the airline we have coming from our bumper of our vehicle, which will eventually come from our motorhome, again, give yourself a big enough loop here so that it can go straight into the box. That should be good about there. We'll cut this. And you just want to make sure your cut is straight across. That looks pretty good. So we'll take it, wrap it around, and insert it in there. This is a good size loop so that we don't have any issues. I might take some take a zip tie or something and tie it off here to keep it away from hitting this hose. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to put the grill and the bumper back on before we tie any power into our system, because we don't want any live wires down here while we're working with them. So we'll go ahead and get the grill back on the way that we took it off and put our bumper back on the way we took it off, and then we can come back and show you the connections down here and the connections we're going to make to the battery. When it comes to mounting up your airline fitting on the front of your truck, there's a couple of different ways you can do this. The bracket that came with our kit actually does have a spot for that and for the breakaway switch. The problem is the breakaway switch mount is directly behind this license plate. So we couldn't mount the breakaway switch up there, and it has to have something really sturdy to pull against, so that when you pull this lever, you have something to pull against. Now the problem that we were having was that this airline bracket, the holes on it did not line up with the bracket that came in our kit. So what we did was we decided to use the bracket that the airline fitting normally would go on for our breakaway switch, and then our airline, since it's just a quick connect, there should be no force pushing or pulling super hard on this. We just use a couple of screws and some nuts on the back side and mounted it to this license plate. It does move just the slightest bit, but again, if you're pulling hard enough to rip this license plate off, you're not operating this correctly. So that'll give them a nice clear place to be able to connect their airline fitting, and it kind of matches the cleanliness of putting all our accessories in these two openings. Now with everything connected to our bumper, we can now make our connections to our battery. We're going to connect our charge line and the power to our system down there. Let's take this nut off. And you always want to do the ground last. That's how you keep the terminals from sparking. Put that one on and put this one on. We'll thread the nut back on. Again, you want to be sure that your fuse is not in the fuse holder. That is the last thing we're going to do. We'll tighten this back up and then get our ground in place. Now remember, this ground is the ground from our operating unit. We may actually try to bend this. I don't like how this ring terminal is sticking straight out there. So what we can do is, if we're careful, you can bend it down just like that. Just tuck our wires back and out of the way. Last step is putting in our fuse. And in order to test this system, you will have to connect to your motorhome, because there's no compressor on the inside like there is on the Stay and Play Duo. So we'll have to hook up to our motorhome in order to charge up the system to check to see if everything's working. But as of now, we can go ahead and throw our nuts back on our front bumper and then reinstall the grill and everything that we took off the top. Now when it comes to the motorhome portion of the installation, we're going to have an air tank that we're going to have to install, as well as tapping into some of the existing air lines on the motorhome. After all, that is what this kit is designed to do. Take air pressure from your motorhome, put it into that tank, and then use it in your braking system. What we're going to be doing is we will tap into the brake lines, or the air lines, in front of the rear axle. Then we'll come back, run our air lines over the axle, tie it into our canister that we're going to mount behind the rear axle on a piece of angle iron. And then we'll take a single line, run it back all the way to the back of the coach, which is where we're going to have our air fitting that we can connect to our towed vehicle. Now, underneath our motorhome, we have to get our supply tank in place. We're going to start by tapping into our factory air lines. Now, we're underneath a Tiffin motorhome, and we're right in front of the rear axle. The tank will actually be mounted behind the rear axle, but our two lines that we're going to need to tap into are this smaller red line, that is our metered air, and then up here you can see we have another piece of blue tape on this larger green line, that's going to be our air supply. So we need to tap into two of those, or each of those. You'll have two different size fittings in your kit, and they're going to be push to connect fittings. So we'll get this one tapped in and this one tapped in. To prepare for splicing into our lines, we want to clean off the lines really well with we're just using some soapy water. You want to get any grit or road grime off of them that might be on them from just driving your coach. So you just want them really clean, because that's what's going to give us our seal in those fittings. Now to cut this, we're going to be using a pair of airline tube cutters. I highly recommend getting a set of these. They're not that expensive. Even if you use them for this one installing your Air Force One, you're going to use them a lot. So when you cut this line, you definitely want to go up to your coach and let all the air out of your brakes. We did that. You just pump the brakes with the coach off until you don't hear any more air. There might still be a little bit of air in these lines, so don't be alarmed if you hear that air come out. And you're looking for a nice straight cut, which we got there. And we'll take our smaller fitting. This is going to be the airline or the junction where you want to put your airline tube going back to your tank, and then these are the T that you want to tie into this line. We'll take it. I always like to slide it on first and then push it till it clicks, and then give it a slight tug to make sure it's seated properly. We'll take the other side and do the same thing. Push it in, spin it just so our airline is pointed rearward, and we can get our other fitting installed now. Now we're going to do the same thing to our other line. I want to prep it, clean it off really well. Do the same thing. Make sure we make a straight cut. There's the remaining air. Make sure our cut is straight, which it is. If it's not, you can also take another little bite at it to make sure it's straight. The reason you want that cut to be straight is because when your airline's going into this fitting, it has to seat against this wall right here. So if it's crooked, it's not going to seat correctly, and then the seal will not seal properly. We'll do the same as the other one and slide it over the end. Push it till it seats, just like that. And then this one we may actually have to cut a little bit of length off so we can get it to bend over. There we go. Yep, just like that. So now we can get our airlines strung out, make sure we got enough length, and we'll connect our airlines here, and then we can get our tank mounted up. Now behind the rear axle, we've marked off a location where we'd like to put our tank, drilled a couple of holes, half-inch holes here in our brace. Your tank will come with a backing plate, but we found in the instances of running it on this angle iron, we had enough space back here to where we can put a nut on it. And what we're going to do is our supply line is going to come in here. That's coming from our green line. And then our regulator, our metered air, is going to go into this inlet. And then our air going to the back of our coach is going to be this elbow here. So we'll get our tank mounted up. And when we run those airlines to the tank, you just want to be sure to avoid anything hot or moving. Tying it off to existing wiring is always a safe option because the manufacturer put it there so it doesn't get harmed, so it's a safe place for you to put your airlines there. And once you get your airline run back to the back of your vehicle, you want to pick out a spot of where you want to mount your fitting to be able to connect your towed vehicle to it. We could do it on either one of these sides, but we'd rather just keep it over here with our 7-pole. So we've got a piece of tape on there. We marked the tape, and we're going to drill a couple holes and then mount up our fitting. Another trick is if you use a piece of tape when you're drilling through fiberglass, it helps make nice clean holes like we have here. Now we'll take our included hardware that comes in your kit, slide it up, put our bolt in, put a washer on the back side, and then your locking nut. Now in order to cut this, we'll do the same thing that we did for our other lines. Make a nice, clean, straight cut. Make sure it's flush. And then we'll do a nice even loop around. Make sure there's no kinks and push it into place. Well guys, hopefully this video helped you decide whether or not the Demco Air Force One supplemental braking system is right for you and your 2023 Ford F-150.